Yeah, because I've seen the modern tradition in the last 15 years. People will take the story in Exodus 32 and they'll say the Israelites at the bottom of Mount Sinai were trying to worship Yahweh.
Mhm.
So they take that misunderstanding and then they try to push it over into stuff like Thanksgiving and Christmas,
Specifically
and specifically Christmas, right?
Yeah, and Easter, but more Christmas
Yeah.
than anything. Part of the reason
But-
we wanted to do the video is because I did bring the topic up on my Facebook page just to ask the question, I was truly looking for an example anywhere in scripture of someone accidentally worshiping an idol, specifically because around this time of year, of course, the memes just start flowing of, the people around the golden calf and just, throwing the accusation of idol worship at everyone that, people possibly can. And I'm guilty of that too. I've done it myself. So, I wanted to really, make sure if I'm going to be accusing a wide swath of people that actually, I consider technically my brethren in the faith of committing a certain sin, maybe I should make sure that that's actually what's going on, actually what they're doing. Because like I said, Sean and I have just been studying the Old Testament so much that I kind of can't ignore anymore what idol worship actually is exhibited as in scripture.
Yeah.
We don't see examples of idol worship as someone just accidentally, ignorantly, innocently, whatever, being taught a tradition growing up like pretty much all of us have, especially with Christmas. And while those things include absolutely traditions that, at best are modeled after paganism and at worst are just straight from certain pagan rituals, that fact can be true. And it can also be true that those people who are innocently doing those things aren't actually knowingly engaging in idol worship, like literally as the Bible defines it. I think basically everybody who has followed us long enough to know Sean and I just have a heart for evangelism of the Torah observance. And one of the big stumbling blocks that we find is our approach to how we as a community are trying to get Christians to understand that some of the things that they're being taught to do are not scriptural and in fact are sin. And so Sean and I we like to have the right approach with it. And I have realized that my approach should not include accusing them of a grave sin that they're not actually committing. I mean, a Christian is right when they're telling you they don't worship their tree. They're right about that.
But as we're seeing commentary in the chat, if they kneel down to pick up presents in front of their tree, are they worshiping an idol?
Guys, we just explained to you what idol worship is. So here's the thing. Sean and I agree with the sentiment of the spiritual application of this idea of idolatry. Don't make money into a god. Don't make whatever you're obsessed with, any addictions, don't place things above the creator. Don't prioritize things over him and your relationship with him, things like that. And if you want to call that idolatry in the spiritual sense, we don't disagree with that sentiment. But if we're going to actually if we're going to actually help people come out of these deceptions, we need to make sure that we're not accusing them of some actually quite horrific things. If someone was to go and, they're accusing me of idol worship, let me go study and see what that actually is in the Bible. Not only are they going to be appalled at what they're reading and that they're being accused of doing that kind of behavior, they're also going to have a point to come back to you and say, well, I'm not doing those things, so I'm not worshiping an idol. And they're technically, biblically correct.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize the history of Christmas. It didn't always involve a tree.
Yeah, the tree, I guess, is actually only about 300 or 400 years old. That tradition started in Germany in the 1500s.
So there was, people would just bring in other types of leafy boughs and branches and things, and as a time of decoration, if you will, for this moment, because it was a Catholic tradition that was pushed for many years for people to celebrate this, and the Catholics, of course, called it the birth of Christ. Right. So we don't agree with a lot of Catholic theology. In fact, probably none of it, but the tradition that has become so commercialized in the last 100 years in the United States about what this particular, present giving holiday is.
I call it consumer moss.
Yeah, it becomes something that can definitely take your focus off the Father. And absolutely. I couldn't find any historical validation that it's literally the birth of Jesus. And even if it was the birth of Jesus, there's nothing in the scriptures that tell you to celebrate the birth of Jesus in that manner. So yeah, it's definitely a modern tradition that people will have to weed through as far as where they feel comfortable. And I don't personally think that the application of you bringing in a tree or a branch or a bow into your house, it doesn't represent the womb of Isis. It doesn't represent all the different applications that someone decided in a specific book about, about the 1880s, that person who wrote that book about how they interpreted all these things to mean.
Yeah, that's
idolatry.
A whole separate show. Like the actual issue of the real historical proof of the claims that are made about Christmas and where some of these traditions come from and things like that. That's a whole separate conversation and debate that Sean and I honestly aren't trying to have. This isn't a show in defense of Christmas or anything, or even in defense of keeping Christmas. We're still saying
we don't keep Christmas.
We don't keep Christmas.
We're just trying to draw a line of definitions from Scripture, which is if your family does still keep Christmas, they're not worshiping Baal or Ashtoreth or Isis or any of that stuff, guys. They're not. There's a totally different specific practice that went along with idolatry in the Old Testament, and it was horrific.
And people still do it today in the underground. I mean,
the secret cults in different places. But your family that just is giving someone a taiko toy for Christmas, they're not worshiping a Baal. They're not sacrificing children. They're not eating blood. They're not drinking blood. They're not having mass orgies. They're not doing any of that stuff. They just have this unique tradition that they come in. And the gift-giving concept wasn't even a part of the ancient tradition. That was something that's been more modernly adopted.
Yeah.
So the whole concept of the consequence of putting the gift under the tree, I literally was at times in my life where we didn't put the gifts under the tree. We put them on a table next to the tree.
Right.
So therefore, I didn't technically bow down to anything. The point is, we have to define what actual worship is. And actual worship is taking a sacrifice before a god. We do the same metaphorically, like I've said, because we're at a position in prophecy, like that has been foretold, that we would be scattered across the plane of the earth under the heaven. We would not be able to celebrate the feasts of God in Jerusalem. There would be no standing temple. There is no priesthood. We're in that moment of prophecy right now. And the only time another temple comes back is the New Jerusalem when Yeshua returns to the firmament. Since we're not there yet, we do our acts of worship, as Paul explains, with obedience to the covenant, with obedience to the commandment. In ancient days, people knew the difference between worshiping something, a god, and worshiping Yahweh. There was a stark difference, guys. People were dying horrifically while other people were having weird play, right? This is the occult. And then over here, there was people having a peaceful meal with the Spirit of God resting on them in joy and fellowship. Literally the huge stark difference. That's all. It was night and day. If we're trying to tell people that keeping a strange amalgamation of traditions over the last 1,700 years that they call Christmas, and we're trying to tell them they're worshiping a false god, when they, in their mind, in their innocence and their ignorance, they're dedicating this strange collection of traditions to Jesus, they're not technically, by definition, they're not worshiping false gods. Are they worshiping Yahweh the way that he would like to be done? Maybe not.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they're worshiping a false god and what that literally details. So to make that accusation in olden times, this is a serious accusation to bring before someone.
Yeah.
We would have to bring them before the priest and say they're committing idolatry, which is a death penalty.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that our language is very clear and our understanding of what worship is very, very well laid out in our brains. It's from Scripture, like we try to show you tonight.
I want to remind everybody real quick that two things can be true at once. Sometimes it's hard to be in the community that we're in of Torah people because it's always one extreme or the other. And there's no happy medium. The truth is somewhere in the middle for a lot of people. It's if Sean and I are sitting here saying what we're saying, we are literally condoning Christmas and idol worship. We're literally patting sinners on the back. Or on the other hand, we could be on the whole other side of the spectrum where we're just like, you can't do this at all. It's evil. It's idol worship. Like people don't want us to be anywhere in the middle. We have to be somewhere on either it's completely wrong and idolatrous, or we're all about it. And we've got our Santa hats on and our, dogs have the little reindeer antlers going,
we're trying to take an educated approach.
We want you guys to understand that Sean and I don't like the extremes in this community where it has to be all one way or the other, or you're false teachers. It's about some balance.
Paul, the disciples asking, well, what is Jeremiah 10 talking about then?
It's talking about exactly what we described as talking about an actual idol. An
Asherah pole. So to make an Asherah pole, which went along part and parcel with the Baal pole, with the Baal god, the golden calf, like we had on screen at the beginning of the show, like we have behind us on the screen here. Like that was why it's plural in Exodus 32:7.
Right.
That's why it kept saying over and over to make us gods, plural, that goes before us. They just got to the first one. They were going to make more because the whole thing is associated with the pantheon of gods. So the wife of Baal was Ashtoreth.
Right.
Or the wife of Osiris, which is the Apis bull, is Isis. So it was part and parcel for the thing. For them, that's why they would say they worshipped Baal and Ashtoreth, because those were the same pantheon, the family of gods that all the nations, the nations outside of Israel worshipped. So there was part and parcel. It's the same concept. It's just like we saw earlier. Sometimes they would say Remphan, which is the star of Saturn, which is a Greek god who's also represented as Ra in Egypt, and he's represented as Remphan amongst the Canaanites. It's the same pantheon of gods. If you're unaware of how that relationship takes place, please go check out my Kingdom Cast series where I've been investigating Babylon. I've been reviewing that for about 8 different episodes. But so for them in one passage to say they were worshiping the Baals at the high places, and another passage to say they're worshiping Ashtoreth in the high places, same stuff, same practices that we've explained, same horrific stuff. It was all evil, and it was not celebrating Christmas with gifts and kids.
It wasn't an ignorant act. They knew they were going and cutting down a tree to build it into an idol to worship it. That's the difference. And it doesn't mean that we're defending the practice of getting and decorating a Christmas tree. That's what I'm saying, guys. 2 things can be true at once. A Christian probably shouldn't be bringing a tree into their house and decorating it with things to celebrate Christ when that's not even in the Bible. But it's also true that Jeremiah 10 isn't actually about Christmas trees. It's about the actual conscious act of idol worship.
Yeah.
You just can't put the two into the same category, biblically speaking. I mean, outside of the Bible, we can conflate all kinds of ideas and spiritualize all kinds of literal things from the scriptures. But as far as how these things are defined in scripture, Jeremiah 10 is clearly about idol worship, conscious idol worship.
Yes, it is.